Welcome to the Fantasy Throwdown Podcast, bringing you the latest in sports news, fantasy analysis, and opinions. Don't forget the hot takes. Can't have a sports show without hot takes these days. What about hot cakes, though? I want some hot cakes. Now here's your host, ready to jump into the thick of things, Dwayne Callender.
Welcome to the show, everyone. We got the divisional round in the NFL starting today, and quite a lot to discuss and not a whole lot of time because the injury news has come in and honestly nothing changed. So basically gonna have to go with the status quo for now. So Adam Thielen is a go for the Vikings. He is gonna play with the injured ankle that was cut in practice on Wednesday and just gonna wear some padding. So let's just talk about the games today, and I'll talk about the games briefly tomorrow, and then we'll get into the DFS lineups before we head out because the games will be kicking off within the hour. So basically, we've got the Niners hosting the Vikings, obviously out in San Francisco today. Niners are 7.5-point favorites. Overall line over-under is going to be at 44.5. Obviously, the Niners are over a touchdown favorite. I think that line is a bit too rich. I mean, not that I'm saying Minnesota's great or anything based off of that comeback. Well, not necessarily comeback, but based off of that overtime win last week against the Saints. But the Niners haven't exactly been juggernauts to close out the year. And, in terms of a home field advantage, New Orleans in the Superdome was a far more significant threat to the Vikings than the Niners at home. So, the Niners got a slightly less line than what New Orleans got. But I still think that, if this was under a touchdown, I feel a little bit better about the line. Just betting it straight out, I would have to take the Vikings plus as the underdog plus 7.5. But, overall, I still think San Francisco wins this. I just think that it's a little bit too deep from a combination standpoint between the pass and the run. I do think we're going to see some different sets out of Kyle Shanahan, the coach of the 49ers. I mean, Mike Zimmer is very familiar with the Niners offense. The Vikings run this same West Coast offense as San Francisco does, which is also one of the reasons why I think this game stays a bit closer than what the odds makers are giving it. This is one of those games where, I would probably take the first half line of the Vikings +4 and take the under on the 22 points. But outside of that, in terms of fantasy value, I would be looking at, the Niners' defensive line has suffered a significant amount of injuries. They've lost 4 defensive tackles over the course of the year. Their linebacker, Quan Alexander, who's been out for 8+ weeks now with a torn pectoral, he got activated before the start of this one, so he's going to be playing today. And Alexander does bring a different dimension to the Niners because of his ability to cover running backs out in the flat. So I do take a downgrade to Dalvin Cook from that respect, but I do think Cook is going to be able to have some success running the football against this Niners front. You did see them wear down a bit towards the end of the Seattle game in Week 17. So I got to give a little bit more of a shine to Dalvin Cook. I do like the Minnesota running attack more than the passing attack. Again, Adam Thielen battling an ankle injury, and Stephon Diggs, sideline tantrums aside, he's got a matchup against Richard Sherman. So even if he wants to get the ball more this week, as opposed to what he was seeing last week against the Saints, this is just a terrible matchup. As much as people want to complain about Richard Sherman being too talkative, he is still one of the top quarterbacks in the entire league, even at his age and coming off an Achilles injury less than 2 years ago. I just think that it's a bad matchup overall for Diggs. I would not be looking at him in DFS contests, even in GPPs. Maybe as a one-off, but it's not one that I really want to play around with. And even for Thielen, I'm not as gung-ho about playing him just on a whim. I need to see a little bit more to make that leap of faith, if you will, because my whole thing is that we know Minnesota wants to run the football and burn clock to limit the amount of possession San Francisco has, because San Francisco is going to try to grind down Minnesota's defense and wear them out by the time the fourth quarter rolls around. That's been San Francisco's MO the entire year. Run the football, then you use the play action to get the deep pass plays down the field with Deebo Samuel and Emmanuel Sanders. And obviously, George Kittle is going to be a factor in the tight end position. So, realistically, from a DFS standpoint, I'm not as interested in this game as some of the others, but, I think Kittle is the lock button here. Kittle is going to see quite a bit of action. Mostert, also, you can roster him in your lineups and feel confident in it. Moving on to the Saturday night matchup, we've got the Ravens at 10.5-point favorites over the Titans. Over-under line is at 47.5. Here's the thing about this game. There's going to be a lot of running and not a whole lot of possession unless there are a bunch of turnovers. I don't like the fact that Baltimore is this large of a favorite. At 10.5 points, you're putting a lot of faith in Baltimore just running Tennessee out the building with their rushing attack and just wearing them down by the time the fourth quarter rolls around. And as much as I love Lamar Jackson, again, Tennessee is going to play enough of a defense to try to contain Baltimore's rushing attack. You got a banged up Mark Ingram, going to give it a go tonight with the injured calf. We're still not sure about his status for tonight's game, so it could be a lot of workload involved for Gus Edwards and Justice Hill, the backup running backs, and Lamar Jackson, who is the NFL's the NFL's leading rushing attack overall as a team. But you got the NFL's leading rusher and Derrick Henry on the other side for the Titans. Again, this is the reason why I don't like the over-under line. I got to take the under, and I got to take the Titans with the 10.5. I mean, if Baltimore is given 10.5, you need Tennessee to completely fall off by the time the fourth quarter rolls around. And I just think that if Tennessee gets down, they're still going to keep running the football. I don't see them imploding and just trying to have Ryan Tannehill check the ball down the field. To me, I'm not a big fan of Ryan Tannehill as a DFS option unless you're factoring in a blowout situation and then you're stacking Baltimore running backs and not necessarily pass catching options. To me, it doesn't really make a whole ton of sense. So again, this is one of those games where I'm kind of staying away from a DFS perspective. Outside of, and again, I don't really like the plays. Like, unless Mark Ingram gets ruled out, you can punt with Gus Edwards or Justice Hill, or maybe do a tandem in a GPP lineup. But we're not going to know that news right now. So again, it's one of those games where I have it as a stay away option. Moving on to the Sunday contest, we've got the Chiefs hosting the Texans. Chiefs also a 10.5-point favorite. Over-under line is at 51.5. Now, this is the game where I could see the Chiefs blowing out the Texans because the Texans secondary is banged up. Tyreek Hill has the best overall matchup of the weekend out of the wide receiver position in terms of wide receiver cornerback matchups. This is where I could see the Texans getting into a track meet and not being able to stay with the Chiefs because again, the only scenario where I see the Texans winning this is a case where Deshaun Watson is able to outduel Patty Mahomes and just get enough points on the board to win the game. I don't see the Texans winning a grinded out kind of game. I think they have to win a shootout against KC. I think KC can win a grinded out game and run the football because you can run on this Texans defense and throw on this Texans defense. I think they're the weakest team remaining in the playoffs. If it wasn't for Seattle, which I'll get to in a bit, but this is just one of those games where I see a lot of points being scored here, but I do see Kansas City covering the spread here. Unless there's a backdoor cover by a late touchdown from the Texans, I do see Seattle, winning this matchup. Now, Gary and Conley against Tyreek Hill is going to be one of the matchups to watch here, but I also think that this is just going to be a great matchup for Travis Kelce, the Chiefs tight end. I think in this weekend slate of games, you play Travis Kelce and George Kittle. Obviously, Kittle goes in the tight end spot because he's the earlier game on Saturday, but you play Kelce in the flex spot. Most of the time I would say, play 3 running backs, and 2 running backs, and then another running back in the flex. But to me, this weekend screams 2 tight end weekend. I think it's just that simple. I think Kelce is still going to get all the red zone looks, and the Chiefs should be in the red zone quite a bit against this Texans defense. Yes, you could play some Sammy Watkins as a pivot point from Tyreek Hill, and with the cheaper salary, because Sammy Watkins is only $4,300 on DraftKings and $5,200 on FanDuel, and I think he's only $14 on Yahoo. He's cheap everywhere in the industry. Yes, Sammy Watkins could easily pull a hammy and go out after the first series of the game, but that is the risk you run. And you're also going to see a similar situation with Will Fuller for the Texans. If he's cleared to play tomorrow, I think that's the pivot point off of DeAndre Hopkins, because if you're playing both Kittle and Kelce, you're probably going to run out of money to play 2 great wide receiver options. So you're going to have your choice of either Hill or Hopkins. So, if you're playing Hill, then play Fuller. If you're playing Hopkins, play Watkins as well. And you kind of take it from there. But that's where I'm kind of leaning. I think you got to play both Kittle and Kelce, though. And then for a quarterback option, I think Mahomes is the play here. If you want to do a deep throw, we can talk about the possibility of a big Aaron Rodgers game. But the problem is that, and I'll get to it shortly with the Green Bay-Seattle game, the weather is terrible in Lambeau. I'm not looking to roster many offensive options in that last game on Sunday. So without much further ado, let's talk about it. You got the Seahawks and Packers playing Sunday night on Fox. It's even by the time game kicks off at 6:40. You got the Packers -4 with an over/under of 45.5, and that total has come down as the news of the weather being this awful. Basically we've got temperatures below. I think they had at last check on the weather report, it's gonna be single digits in Green Bay, but it could warm up to the 20s. But if it warms up to the 20s, the idea is that you're going to see snow showers during the game in the forecast. So again, not great weather for having a shootout. To me, you don't fade the offensive options completely in a snow game, but you're not game stacking this one either. So that's why I kind of stayed away from this one, because projection wise, I see the numbers coming down further as we get closer to kickoff tomorrow, depending on how the general public reacts to the weather. So to me, I would just kind of go with the under in this game. And I don't really like either one of these teams, to be honest. For those of you listening, I've been bashing Seattle most of the way through. I think it's just Russell Wilson and a bunch of other dudes on Seattle on offense and defense. I don't think Seattle's defense is all that great. And the Packers, by and large, have turned into a run the ball only option. And, Aaron Rodgers has been, taking a back seat the entire way through. This could be the game where they loosen the shackles off of Rodgers and let him do his thing with some improvisational offense. But we haven't seen it yet. So, yeah, could there be a possibility that both Russell Wilson and Rodgers do a little improv and turn this into a high-scoring passing attack game in the snow? Yeah, it could be a fun game, but more likely scenario is that both of these teams run the ball 30-plus times between their respective running backs, and this ends up being a grinded-out affair where you're getting a 23-20 score to close it out. I could easily see the under going, and even 23-20 might be a little bit too optimistic. I think that first 1-20 probably wins this game. Just because of both teams not looking to make a big mistake, I could see them running this game down by contrition and both sides being okay with that option. So, from my standpoint, I'm kind of leaning away from most of the attack options here. DK Metcalf got priced way up across all sites after his 160-yard game last week. So, from a cost standpoint, I can't see myself looking at Metcalf this week. I would rather play Tyler Lockett because if the attention is going to go to DK and Metcalf from the Green Bay secondary standpoint, I'll take Lockett then. But again, this is a GPP play option. Definitely not cash, and definitely not if I'm only playing a single entry GPP. This is if I'm playing 20 entries, then I can go with Metcalf. But it's just not one where I like where the options are lining up here. So take that for what you will. Outside of the Seattle options, it's basically Lockett I'm looking at. And on the Green Bay side, yeah, could you play Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams as a stack and hope for the best? Yeah, I just don't think that, from an optimal standpoint, it's the way to go. My thinking is more along the lines of it's an Aaron Jones heavy game, or you can pivot and use Jamal Williams, who's coming back off of injury, if you think that the Packers are going to give him some red zone opportunities and he falls into the end zone at a much cheaper salary, and then you can fit more guys in from the Chiefs-Texans game. I don't think that's a bad way to go either, but from a betting standpoint, I don't like either team. I mean, yeah, you could bet Seattle +4. Again, I don't really like their great odds, but to me, it's a pick'em game. So yes, you could play Seattle, but it's not one of those games where I'd be shocked if either side won. But I do feel as though the under is the best play out of all the options here from a betting perspective. So that's what I've got. I'm going to get on out of here and upload this because we're getting a little tight on time. So that's all I have for today. We'll talk about the games tomorrow in some more detail, hopefully, once we know what happened tonight, in case we got to change up some of the strategy. So that's all for now. Have a good one, folks.